In 2007, Coca-Cola paid $4.1 billion to buy a company most people had never heard of. And somewhere in that deal, a man who grew up selling crack on the streets of Queens walked away with $100 million. Not because he started a beverage company, not because he invented anything, not because he had a business degree or a trust fund or a mentor who handed him a roadmap. He walked away with $100 million because someone on his team understood one thing that most people never figure out: the difference between a check and a stake. A check pays you once. A stake pays you every time the thing grows. And if you pick the right thing, if you pick something that a $4 billion company eventually wants to buy, a stake changes your life in a way no check ever could. But to understand why Curtis Jackson understood that, you have to go back to the beginning. The real beginning. Not the rap career, not the gunshots. Before all of that, you have to go back to Queens. Curtis James Jackson III was born on July 6, 1975, in South Jamaica, Queens, New York. And if you've never been to South Jamaica, if you only know it from the music it produced, let me tell you what it actually was in the 1970s and 1980s. It was a neighborhood held together by very little. High unemployment, housing projects stacked on top of each other, the crack epidemic arriving like a slow flood that nobody could stop, and a level of everyday violence that most people in this country will never have to understand personally. Curtis didn't just grow up near that world. He was born into the middle of it. His mother, Sabrina Jackson, was 15 years old when she had him. 15. Not a woman who made some bad choices. A teenager trying to survive in a neighborhood with almost no options, who found that the fastest way to feed her child was to sell drugs. And she was reportedly good at it, good enough that she became one of the more feared dealers in the area. This is important, not because it's dramatic, but because it tells you what Curtis's first model of success looked like. The person he loved most, the person who kept the lights on and food on the table, made her money through risk, through street-level hustle, through controlling distribution of a product people wanted. He watched that up close from the time he could walk. And then she was gone. When Curtis was 8 years old, his mother died. The details are disputed. But what isn't disputed is what it did to a small boy in Queens who'd already known more instability than most adults ever face. His father was not in the picture. And so he went to live with his grandparents, who were good people doing their best, in a house that already had 9 other children in it. Think about what that actually feels like. 8 years old, no mother, no father, crammed into a house that's already overflowing, and outside, the streets of South Jamaica, doing what streets like that do, pulling young boys in like gravity. By the time Curtis was 12, he was selling crack cocaine. Not because he was a bad kid, because survival in that environment had a very specific logic to it, and he was smart enough to understand the logic. He's talked about it himself. He would pretend to go to after-school programs and instead work the corner. He brought guns and drug money to school without his grandparents knowing. He was arrested multiple times. He was living 2 lives simultaneously, the one his grandmother hoped he was living and the one the neighborhood was teaching him. But there was something else happening during those same years that would eventually matter more than any of it. He started boxing. And he started rapping. Both of those things, the discipline of the ring and the craft of the mic, gave him something the streets couldn't, a system he could actually master through effort. He was competitive, obsessive, relentless, about improving. People who knew him back then talk about how seriously he took both, not as hobbies, as outlets, as the beginning of something, even if he didn't have the language for it yet. He once said, When I wasn't killing time in school, I was sparring in the gym or selling crack on the strip. That's not a boast. That's the reality of what his options looked like. And somewhere in that reality, a decision was forming, slowly without a clear plan, that music might be the way out. Not just out of the neighborhood, out of the version of the story that most people who grew up where he grew up were headed toward. He started pursuing music seriously in his mid-20s. He connected with Jam Master Jay, one of the founding members of Run DMC, a legend in hip-hop history, who saw something in the young rapper from Queens and helped him develop real structure. How to build a song, how to find a hook, how to turn raw street experience into something that could move people. Under Jay's guidance, Curtis landed a deal with Columbia Records in 1999. He recorded his debut album, Power of the Dollar. There was a single that was generating real buzz. It looked, for the first time in his life, like things were finally coming together. And then everything fell apart. In May of 2000, Curtis Jackson, 25 years old, on the verge of his first album release, was shot 9 times at close range outside his grandmother's house in South Jamaica. 9 bullets, his hand, his arm, his hip, both legs, his chest, his face. 1 bullet knocked out a wisdom tooth and permanently altered his voice, giving him the slightly slurred delivery that would later become part of what made him sound like nobody else. He survived. Somehow, he survived. But the music industry didn't wait for him to recover. Columbia Records dropped him. And not just that, they blacklisted him. The word went through the industry that Curtis Jackson was too dangerous, too controversial, too much of a liability. The song that got him in trouble wasn't even violent. It was Ghetto Quran, a track that named actual drug dealers from the Queens underworld, people who were still alive, still dangerous, and who did not appreciate being mentioned. It created enemies he didn't fully anticipate. He left the hospital and discovered that every door in the music industry was closed, not mostly closed, not partially closed, closed. He couldn't get into a studio in the United States. Labels wouldn't return his calls. He was a rapper without a label, without an album, without income, with a body still healing from 9 bullet wounds, and with a music career that the entire industry had quietly agreed was over before it started. This is where most people would stop. Not because they're weak, because the evidence is overwhelming. Because 9 bullets and a blacklist and no support system and no money is a reasonable amount of reason to try something else. Curtis didn't try something else. He did something smarter than just refusing to quit. He found the one channel that nobody controlled, the one distribution system the industry couldn't shut down. The streets. He went to Canada because he couldn't work in US studios. And with his business partner, Shaw Money XL, he recorded mixtapes. Dozens of them. He took the biggest rap songs on the radio and remixed them. He took beats from artists at the top of the game, Jay-Z, Nas, everybody, and rapped over them with new lyrics that were sharper, hungrier, more vicious than the originals. He flooded the market. Not 1 mixtape, not 2, an avalanche. And then he gave them away. For free, on corners, through DJs, hand to hand, the same way product moves in a neighborhood like the one he grew up in. He understood that if you couldn't buy your way into the game, you could build your own pipeline directly to the people. This is not a small idea. This is the thing. Most people who get shut out of a system go back to the door and knock harder. Curtis built a different door. He bypassed the labels entirely and went straight to his audience. He created so much noise, so much talk, such an undeniable presence in the streets that the industry couldn't ignore him anymore. A mixtape called Guess Who's Back in 2002 is the one that changed everything. It made its way to Eminem. Eminem listened to it and reportedly called Dr. Dre immediately. He said, "This is the best rapper I've heard in years, and we need to sign him now." Think about that sentence. The best rapper I've heard in years. Said about a man the entire industry had agreed was finished. Eminem signed Curtis to Shady Records, a joint imprint with Dr. Dre's Aftermath and Interscope Records. And in February of 2003, Get Rich or Die Tryin' was released. It sold 872,000 copies in its first 4 days. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts. It stayed there for 9 consecutive weeks. It went on to sell over 15 million copies worldwide. It produced 2 #1 singles. It is one of the most commercially successful rap debut albums in history. The man everyone said was finished had just made the most explosive entrance in hip-hop in over a decade. Now here is where the financial forensic audit really begins. Because what happened after the album, what Curtis did with the momentum, the money, and the attention, is the actual story. Most artists, when they get their first real hit, do one thing. They enjoy it. They spend. They upgrade their life. They buy what they always wanted to buy and live the way they always wanted to live. And that's understandable. When you grew up with nothing, spending feels like proof that it worked. Curtis spent some, yes. He bought Mike Tyson's old mansion in Connecticut, 52 rooms, for $4 million. He bought bulletproof SUVs. But underneath all of that, something was happening that most people weren't paying attention to. He was building infrastructure. In 2003, the same year his debut album came out, he founded G-Unit Records, not as an idea, as an actual operating label, signing artists, putting out records, controlling the business behind the music. He signed Lloyd Banks, Tony Yayo, Young Buck. G-Unit became one of the most commercially dominant labels in hip-hop for the next several years. Think about what this means financially. As a recording artist, you earn royalties on your music. The label takes the lion's share, and you get a percentage. As a label owner, you earn on every artist on your roster. You flip from being the talent to owning the talent. You flip from participating in someone else's system to running your own. That same year, he launched G-Unit Clothing, a joint venture with designer Mark Echo, who fronted the manufacturing and distribution costs while splitting profits 50-50 with Curtis. $100 million in sales over the life of that company. He launched G-Unit Films, a ringtone deal, a video game, a deal with Reebok. He understood, almost instinctively, that he wasn't just a rapper. He was a brand. And a brand isn't a thing you participate in. It's a thing you own. It's a thing you can point in multiple directions. It's a thing that generates income from places that have nothing to do with whether you're standing in a recording studio. This is where most people miss it. They see the cars and the mansion, and they think, this is what success looks like. But the real move, the financial move, was happening in the background. He was converting fame into ownership. He was taking the window of attention that success creates and using it to build things that would earn money long after the attention moved on to someone else. And then came the moment that changed everything. In 2004, Curtis told his manager he wanted a water bottle deal. He had noticed something simple, that the markup between cheap water and premium water was enormous. That brands like Poland Spring were selling something people needed every day, and that there was money being made in that space. His manager, Chris Lighty, started making calls. They connected with Glaceau, the small company behind a product called Vitamin Water. A Glaceau executive named Rohan Oza had noticed Curtis drinking the product in a Reebok commercial. It wasn't product placement. He actually liked it. His trainer had introduced it to him. Oza reached out. And here is the conversation that mattered. Most celebrities, when a brand comes calling, take the flat fee. $1 million to put your face on something for a year. 2 million, maybe 5 if you're big enough. You smile, you cash the check, and you move on. Curtis and his team didn't want the flat fee. They wanted equity, a stake in the company itself. Ownership of a piece of what they were building, not just compensation for promoting it. The negotiations were complex. Glaceau's parent company wasn't immediately willing. But eventually, they reached a deal. Curtis got an endorsement fee, his own flavor, Formula 50, grape, and an equity stake in the company that would escalate based on performance targets. He helped take Vitamin Water's annual sales from $100 million to $700 million in 3 years. Then, in 2007, Coca-Cola came knocking. They wanted Glaceau. All of it. The offer was $4.1 billion in cash. Curtis Jackson, the boy from the South Jamaica housing projects. The kid who sold crack on the corner because there was no other option. The rapper who was shot 9 times and blacklisted and told his career was over. Walked away from that deal with an estimated $100 million after taxes. He said something afterward that deserves to sit with you for a moment. He said, "People were talking about how much money I made. But I was focused on the fact that $4.1 billion was made." Read that again. He wasn't celebrating. He was studying. He was looking at that number, $4.1 billion, and asking what it told him about what was possible next time. That's not a winner's mentality. That's an owner's mentality. Those are 2 completely different things. A winner celebrates the result. An owner analyzes what produced it and asks how to scale it. This is the moment in his financial story that most people talk about. But it's not the end of the story. Not even close. Because here's what happened next. And this part of the story matters just as much. After the Vitamin Water deal, Curtis had more money than he'd ever had. Generational money by any standard. And he spent it. Lavishly. Lawsuits, properties, legal battles. A lifestyle that matched the image of the richest rapper in the world. And in July of 2015, Curtis James Jackson III filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The announcement shocked people. Here was the man who made $100 million from a water deal, filing for bankruptcy with debts of over $32 million. How do you go from $100 million to bankrupt? The answer is painful and important because it applies to ordinary people at every income level. Income without systems leaks. Money without structure disappears. It doesn't matter if it's $100 or $100 million. If you spend faster than you build, if you accumulate liabilities faster than you accumulate assets, if lawsuits and properties and legal judgments pile up while your income sources are dwindling, the math eventually catches up. He had earned an enormous amount, but he'd also signed away half his music royalties years earlier to secure his original label deal. His clothing company had stopped producing the same numbers. His music career, like all music careers, had peaked and was declining commercially. And the lawsuits, including a multi-million-dollar judgment for posting a private video without consent, took enormous chunks. The bankruptcy looked like failure. And in some ways, it was. But here's what Curtis Jackson did with it. He filed Chapter 11, not Chapter 7. That's the difference between restructuring and liquidation. Chapter 11 says, "I'm not done. I need to reorganize. I need to restructure my debts and figure out how to keep building." He used the bankruptcy process the way a business uses it, as a legal tool for resetting the board without destroying everything he'd built. He emerged from bankruptcy in early 2017, ahead of schedule. He paid off his debts using proceeds from a legal malpractice lawsuit against his own lawyers and from the sale of his Connecticut mansion. He walked out of it leaner, more focused, and with a different understanding of where the real opportunity was. Television. He had actually started developing the show Power years before the bankruptcy. The concept was his. A story about a drug dealer trying to go straight while running a legitimate nightclub. He shopped it, got rejected, came back, got it to Stars, and was paid $17,000 to be the executive producer, play a character, and essentially be the music supervisor for the entire project. $17,000. The man who made $100 million from vitamin water was back at the table, starting from near zero in a new industry, doing the unsexy work of building something nobody was sure would land. Power premiered on Stars in 2014. It grew slowly at first. Then it caught fire. By its peak, it was the most watched show on the Stars network by a wide margin. It spawned 4 spin-off series: Power Book 2, Power Book 3, Power Book 4, and BMF. The Power universe drove 25% of all demand on the Stars platform. One franchise, produced by one man, propping up an entire network. In 2018, Stars signed him to a 4-year overall deal worth up to $150 million. By the time he left Stars in 2022, he had 25 shows in production across 10 different networks. 25 shows, not as a network, executive with a staff of hundreds. As a producer, operator, and businessman who had applied the same logic to television that he'd applied to the mixtape circuit 20 years earlier. Flood the market, control the distribution, own as much of it as you can. On the day his Stars deal officially ended, he posted on social media, September 17th, 2022, official day of really owning my content and deciding where and how I do it moving forward. That sentence, that's the whole thing. Owning the content, deciding where it goes. That's not what rappers say. That's what moguls say. So what do you actually take from this? Not that you should sell drugs or get shot or file for bankruptcy or become a rapper. None of that is the lesson. The lesson is in the pattern. And the pattern is consistent across every phase of his life. The first thing Curtis understood, long before he had a name for it, is that when the official system shuts you out, you build your own distribution. When Columbia Records blacklisted him, he went to the streets with mixtapes. When he couldn't get into U.S. studios, he went to Canada and recorded anyway. When the industry said no, he went directly to the people and let the noise he created force the industry to say yes. Most people, when they face rejection from a system, either keep begging the system or give up. Curtis did neither. He built around it. He found the version of the distribution channel that nobody was controlling, and he flooded it with so much product that the industry couldn't ignore him. You don't need to be a rapper to apply this. If your industry isn't responding to you, ask yourself, what is the version of the mixtape in your world? What's the channel nobody's guarding? What can you put directly into the hands of your potential customers without permission from any gatekeeper? The second thing he understood is the difference between a fee and a stake. When vitamin water came calling, the easy answer, the comfortable answer, the certain answer, was to take the flat fee, a few $1 million guaranteed, done. He asked for a piece of the company instead. That's not complicated math. That's a completely different relationship to money. A fee says you did a service, here's your payment, transaction complete. A stake says you believe in what this thing can become, and you want to be on the winning side of what happens if it grows. Every time you have an opportunity to earn money, there's a version of this choice available to you. It's not always an equity stake in a beverage company, but it might be the choice between freelancing forever and building a business. between renting your skills and owning your process, between working inside something someone else built and building something of your own. The stake might be smaller than $100 million. That's fine. The principle is the same. The third thing, and this is the hardest one, is that ownership requires you to keep showing up after things go wrong. He was shot 9 times. He was blacklisted. He filed for bankruptcy. He was paid $17,000 to start building a television empire that eventually earned him 9 figures. At every one of those points, the rational thing was to accept a smaller version of success, to settle, to take the sure thing and stop pushing. He didn't, not because he's some mythological figure, but because he understood something that most people learn too late. The exit from every hard chapter in your financial life is usually not backward. It's forward, through the thing, not around it. Building something real on the other side of the setback, not retreating to the comfortable version of the life you had before. He grew up in a place where the people around him were trying to survive. He survived. And then he did something harder and rarer than surviving. He built. He took the distribution knowledge from the drug game and applied it to mixtapes. He took the platform from the music career and converted it into a brand. He took the brand and turned it into equity. He took the equity and turned it into $100 million. He lost a chunk of it, restructured, and came back with a television empire. Each phase funded the next. Each loss became a lesson that redirected the next move. And underneath all of it, one single idea that he came back to again and again. Don't just participate in the system. Own a piece of it. Curtis Jackson grew up in South Jamaica, Queens, with nothing. No connections, no money, no safety net. His mother was gone before he was old enough to understand why. The streets raised him the only way streets can, hard and fast and with no guarantees. And from that foundation, he built something that the most privileged people in the world, with every advantage he never had, spent their whole lives chasing. He didn't do it by being the most talented. There are rappers more talented than 50 Cent who you've never heard of. He didn't do it by getting lucky. He got shot 9 times and blacklisted and bankrupt. He did it by understanding something about money that most people never sit down long enough to learn. Earning is not the same as building. A check is not the same as a stake. Getting paid is not the same as ownership. And ownership, real ownership, the kind that earns while you sleep, the kind that gets bought by Coca-Cola for $4 billion, the kind that drives 25% of a cable network's demand, is the only thing that makes a fortune survive the person who built it. That's the audit. That's the blueprint. The question now is what you do with it. Most people hear stories like this and focus on what happened. But the real value is understanding how it happened. If you're paying attention, you're already ahead of most people. Subscribe, and let's keep going.